On this edition of Private Club Radio, we discuss the election results and what that means for your club. And I'll give you my top 3 mistakes in membership marketing and what your club can do to avoid them. Let's go.
Welcome to Private Club Radio, your weekly source for industry education, news and discussion. Broadcasting from Tampa, Florida, ladies and gentlemen, here is your host, Gabriel Aloisi.
Thanks for joining me today on the show. The election is over, and I'm sure that comes as a relief to many of you, whether your candidate won or lost. That means our Facebook feeds can go back to being filled with cats and babies, and our water cooler talk can be about that hit new primetime comedy or what was on HBO last Sunday night. I'm ready for that. I bet you are too. Some exciting things for you on today's episode. First off, we're going to unveil a new segment on the show, which I'm really excited to bring you. As you may know, we've had a number of great organizations come on as sponsors of this show. Most recently, we welcomed the National Club Association. The NCA is the only organization that actively lobbies the U.S. Congress with a specific focus on the needs of the private club industry. And they also serve as an advocate for private clubs in the regulatory agencies, state houses, and courts. After having their president and CEO, Henry Wallmeyer, their vice president of government relations, Brad Steele, and many of their board members on this show, I was thrilled to bring them on as a show partner because I think they have a ton of value to bring. We're calling this segment Club Perspectives, and on this first edition, Brad Steele will join us to walk through last Tuesday's elections. We all know the shock that was the presidential race, but Brad will also take us through the other key races in the House and Senate. Find out the impact these results will have on the NCA's lobbying efforts for the private club industry. After that, I'm going to play you a couple clips from my appearance on another club industry podcast. I had some pretty shocking things to say on how clubs are marketing themselves, and I wanted to make sure that you heard it straight from the horse's mouth. So make sure to stay tuned after Brad.
And now, it's time for Club Perspectives, presented by the National Club Association.
Welcome to the inaugural edition of Club Perspectives presented by the National Club Association. Each month on this segment, we'll be discussing all sorts of topics ranging from advocacy to government relations and from lifestyle trends to governance. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Brad Steele, the NCA's Vice President of Government Relations and General Counsel. Brad, how you doing today?
Doing wonderfully well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Of course, last Tuesday, we just had our elections. The results are in, and I wanted to get your perspective on some of those key races. Let's first start with the House.
Absolutely. I can tell you that the great news is that I've now had about a moment or two of sleep and can at least review some of these numbers. And got to say, we had a tremendous success from a pro-club, pro-growth perspective in the House of Representatives. As you all remember, and I know your listeners certainly know, that before the election, the Republicans had control of 247 seats. The Democrats had 188. After the election, there will be 241 Republicans and approximately 194 we anticipate Democrats. So there's one seat currently that is outstanding. We anticipate that it'll take about a week or so for that to be completely settled. There are also 2 races that are in runoffs, but those are one race is actually pitting a Republican against a Republican. Okay. So naturally there'll be a Republican winner. Okay. And in the other, it's a heavily Republican district. Both of those runoffs are in Louisiana. So we can say with confidence that at this point, it seems the Democrats that only were able to gain a net of 6 seats in the House of Representatives. Now, from my projections, and indeed everybody's, there was an expectation of probably between 10 to 15. So clearly, again, the issues and the policies that are pro-growth, pro-club seem to resonate, and they resonated very well in those districts that were swing, that were really up and toss-up, able to be taken by the Democrats and just weren't. So from a perspective, again, from the private club industry's perspective, we were ecstatic about the fact that it will once again be Speaker Paul Ryan from Wisconsin who will retain the gavel. And even though the Republican majority has been decreased, it has only been decreased by that 6 total net seats. So they'll have a majority of 23 seats. Extremely important. Obviously, it's very difficult to pass anything in the House of Representatives with the various factions, not only in the Republican Party, but in the Democratic Party. But the reality is, with a 23-seat majority, Speaker Ryan will be able to continue to push for those kinds of policies that we've been pushing for. It's always been our bastion. Our benefit has been the House of Representatives, and we're pleased that voters across the United States continue to send back their members in a large majority. Again, 23-seat majority for the House Republicans is a very good thing. Got some fascinating races across the United States that actually came up. One of them, a Republican incumbent, a 12-term member of the House of Representatives. 12 terms means 24 years.
Yep.
John Mica, a Republican from Florida. Unfortunately, he is chairman of, still is, but will no longer be chairman of the Transportation Committee. So he certainly was a powerful member of the House of Representatives, but was not successful in his reelection bid.
I actually interviewed him back in, I think, 2006 when I was working on Capitol Hill. So pretty
absolutely. No, he's been around forever.
Yeah.
Outstanding member and always very, very supportive of our industry, coming from, Florida. The Sunshine State is obviously heavily golf and club oriented. So he understood and was aware of our issues, and we were sorry to see him go. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, another Republican from the Florida Sunshine State also lost. This time he lost to Florida's former Republican governor, Charlie Crist. Charlie Crist won his seat, but of course he won that congressional seat as a Democrat. Beating Representative David Jolly.
He started from Republican, then he switched to Independent, and then he became a Democrat. So he's run the whole gamut, Mr. Crist.
He's been across the board and ran for Senate. Was not successful after his gubernatorial run. Turned independent and then decided that this was the seat for him to be re-engaged in elective office, and was successful. So interesting turn there. Yeah. And finally, I think one of the more fascinating aspects of the history of politics is what took place in Wyoming. Former Vice President Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, won the seat, the at-large congressional seat in the state of Wyoming that her father once held. Wow. So she was 2 years ago interested in running for the United States Senate in Wyoming, and would have had a very contentious primary against Senator Mike Enzi, who is a strong supporter of clubs and as a small businessman knows our issues. So we weren't really excited about the potential of that primary. She dropped out of that and instead bided her time and found that the Wyoming congressional seat, which came open, was probably a better fit for her, and she is now taking over a seat her father once held. So kind of interesting with regard to the House, and fascinating, but that's the way it always works, right? Sure. A little bit of name recognition for Charlie Crist, a little bit of name recognition for Liz Cheney, and clearly no name recognition for me when I ran for Congress in 2000.
Well, it sounds like you're pretty bullish on what happened, on what went down on Tuesday, at least in the House. Let's turn it over to the Senate. Tell us about what happened there, Brad.
Exactly. Well, the Senate actually was almost even better than what we had anticipated from the House of Representatives side of things. We expected, with the tremendous number of Democrats, or rather Republicans, up for re-election, and the limited number of Democrats who were up for re-election, that there was going to be a significant amount of turnover. And indeed, there was strong speculation with all of the races that the National Republican Senatorial Committee had to put money into, that there just wouldn't be the resources, there wouldn't be the ability for Republicans to maintain control, and therefore have a pro-club, pro-growth perspective continue in the 115th Congress. But lo and behold, much as this surprising election showed us in many areas of the electorate, Senate Republicans were extremely successful. Pre-election, we had 54 Republicans and 46 Democrats in the upper chamber. Following the election, we have 51 Republicans and 48 Democrats. We have one outstanding race, and that is once again in the state of Louisiana. They have a runoff set for, again, December 10th. Our expectation is, though, that runoff will lead to another Republican. So at the end of the day, I expect that Republicans will have only lost 2 seats in this really not the best of all possible environments to run in. So really a big change just in terms of what everyone's thought was. There's no way the Republicans are going to maintain majority. It couldn't happen. And now, lo and behold, not only did they maintain it, they maintained it with 2 extra seats. Potentially it was going to be a 50-50 tie.
Yeah.
So really a big change there. Republicans held seats in Florida with Senator Marco Rubio, in Missouri with Senator Roy Blunt, and North Carolina with Senator Richard Burr. Those latter 2 were never really on the radar as potential problems, but had very, very strong Democratic candidates, but came through. Mm-hmm. We're successful in Ohio with Senator Rob Portman, keeping his seat, Senator Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, and then finally Senator Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. The latter 2, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Senator Toomey and Senator Johnson, were both supported by the National Club Association's Club PAC. We're ecstatic about their reelection. They were in extremely difficult races, and ultimately their understanding of small business issues, I think, helped push them through to be successful. Republicans also were successful in an open seat, a seat that was held by a Republican who decided to retire in the state of Indiana. And that was a very, very tough race, considering the Democratic opponent was a former 2-term governor and 2-term senator. So a well-known individual who really was expected to take that seat without much of a problem. And thankfully, Republicans were able to maintain it. And again, that helps us keep that pro-growth, pro-club perspective in the Senate. Democrats kept seats in California, Maryland, and Nevada that were open. Those incumbent senators decided to retire, but Democrats were successful in those states. Those states weren't surprising. They are heavily Democratic, so we expected that those seats would be kept in the hands of Democrats. But interestingly, they did have some success. They did flip 2, as I mentioned, Republican seats. Those Republican seats were in Illinois with Senator Mark Kirk, and in New Hampshire with Senator Kelly Ayotte. We supported Senator Kelly Ayotte. We're very, very sorry that she was not able to be successful. She, as your listeners may recall, was the lead sponsor in the United States Senate for the STARS Act. Mm-hmm. So we really wanted to see her continue. Unfortunately, she just got caught up in what was a very difficult presidential race, and that turned around and really, I think, affected her. But all in all, great result. Go ahead.
Who do you think may take the reins on the STARS Act there, Brad?
Well, I think that we've had Senator Marcus King, who is an independent from Maine, as the other co-sponsor. I think at this juncture, the really good news is because of the presidential election, we may have some opportunities to be able to work I think at a broader fix rather than just a very small fix of the STARS Act, maybe a broader fix of Obamacare with President-elect Trump. And that might be a good segue for us to sneak into that.
That's right. Yeah, the big headline of the night, obviously, the presidential race. And we now know the incumbent is Mr. Donald Trump. Take us through what happened there.
Just an amazing result, and I can tell you that as I spoke with our members on our board, I'm eating crow, but happily eating crow. My expectation, as most of my colleagues here in Washington, was that there really was a very, very slim chance that Donald Trump could ever be elected president, that Secretary Clinton had a clearer path, and I think, she found just exactly how tough it is. Right. To run for president, and indeed, when you look at the numbers, it's quite fascinating. Total vote was about 60 million for Secretary Clinton, about 59,700,000 for Donald Trump. So she certainly won the popular vote. A lot of that has to do with the western states and California and New York mostly. But the reality is the Electoral College vote went the way that no one anticipated. At this point, we have the total will end up being 306 for Donald Trump and 232 for Secretary Clinton.
I was absolutely shocked. Yeah.
It is absolutely amazing. When we were watching it, some of the states that were very critical, most importantly, at least to me, was North Carolina. When he got North Carolina, then you could see the path open in different ways. And then he got the other battleground state of Florida. And once he did that, boy, there were really some opportunities for him to be successful. Iowa and Ohio, other battleground states, we anticipated he was going to win. But he really had to get North Carolina for there to be an opportunity. And when he got North Carolina, then we saw the dominoes fall. And most importantly, those dominoes became Michigan. Michigan still sort of up in the air, but we expect it to be ultimately called for him, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Interestingly, those three states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, have not gone Republican since 1988 for both Michigan and Pennsylvania and 1984 for Wisconsin. Wow. So there was no thought in anyone's mind that those states were truly in play based on the simple fact that at the end of the day, those Democratic voters go home. They come back to the Democratic candidate because they've done so historically for nearly 30 years. So when you start to break down and wonder, well, how did that happen? How did Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin flip? The real answer turns to, I think, the populist message and the jobs message that Trump had. One fascinating aspect of the numbers when we really crunched them was that Hillary Rodham Clinton only beat Donald Trump by 8% when we talk about union voters. Mm-hmm. And that was the lowest that any Democrat has had since 1984.
Yeah, that's usually a stronghold. Exactly.
Absolutely. So having only, of course she won. There was no question that she was going to win with the number of union voters. That wasn't the question. The question is by how much. For instance, President Barack Obama won by 18% over Mitt Romney. So clearly that 10% was a significant problem. And indeed, if it was the lowest since Walter Mondale's, traumatic and huge loss in 84, then we know that there's really where Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin came from. That's how he won it. Indeed, in Ohio, one of those very, very important battleground states, she actually lost the union vote to Donald Trump by 9 points.
Wow.
So you know that at the end of the day, when he would say, look, trade is important and the lost jobs need to stop and we need to reinvest in America to make sure that there's a tax policy that allows businesses to come back to the United States, it worked. It resonated with those blue-collar union voters who were the Reagan Democrats in the 80s.
Yeah.
So he brought those back, and we haven't, as Republican candidates, they have never been able to do that, obviously, as I say, since 88 and 84. So it was a fascinating result, and that result then, I think, really gives a pretty large mandate to Donald Trump for him to do the kinds of things that not only will help those disaffected blue-collar workers who come back to the Republican Party, but everybody. And that includes private clubs. It's an interesting juxtaposition, right? Those blue-collar workers and private clubs. But what we all are small business employers and employees. And I think that's that nexus, that connectivity is the line that will allow this next 4 years to be very good for clubs.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, let's talk about the next couple of years here, definitely in terms of with Republican control of the House, Senate, and the presidential seat. What sorts of legislation are you really bullish on, Brad?
Well, we're really excited about the significant opportunity that we believe lies ahead. And it's been basically 8 years where the National Club Association, the private club industry, has not been able to do too much of anything except play defense. And it's been a very tough defensive battle, considering there are a lot of guns pointed at us. So now what we have the opportunity to do is first take a real bite out of those things that have been exceptionally bad for private clubs. First and foremost, Obamacare. That will likely be repealed and replaced, but I want your listeners to understand that it's going to take some time. But the benefit of repealing and replacing that means, number one, things like the employer mandate that every club has had to deal with a peculiar definition of what a full-time worker is. Mm-hmm. Someone working 30 hours or more. I mean, everybody knows that a full-time worker is 40 hours.
Right.
So that's going to be gone. Seasonal worker issues, those who've never been offered insurance before but now have to be offered insurance, that's going to be removed. So those are bottom line financial issues that are extremely important for clubs. Add to that things like the Cadillac tax, the health insurance tax, and the medical device tax, all of which increased clubs' premiums will now go. So that's really what I think we're excited about, based on the fact that that's something we didn't expect, didn't hope, didn't assume could happen, but because of the result, we turned around, and now we've got the opportunity for really good success.
Wow.
And that's huge for the private club industry.
Well, it sounds
Secondly,
like
I think
your sleep is not going to necessarily increase, though, here, because you're going to be working
that's right.
a lot hard for us.
We'll be working hard to make sure that goes, and as I say, it'll take some time for it to go. I think the second and probably the most important thing that I want to make sure your listeners know about is that the Department of Labor's overtime rule will be altered. But there's a huge caveat there. I don't want any of your listeners to think that this rule will not go into effect starting December 1st. So it will. Come hell or high water, this president is not going to provide any relief to his final legacy policy. But when January 20th rolls around and the inauguration is completed, I think that there will be significant opportunities for us to be successful in changing this rule. The president-elect has indicated that he wanted to either phase in or have some additional or other adjustments to the club, to the rule for clubs, for small businesses. And that certainly will take some time, but I expect it to come to pass within the first 6 months of 2017. What it is, we're not sure yet, but we will certainly be discussing with the administration that this overtime rule has to change. So we are going to have it start December 1, but I do see that there's a very strong potential for light at the end of the tunnel regarding that additional cost and that impact to employees. It's not just clubs' bottom lines. It's also the employees who are affected with less opportunities, less growth potential, less shift opportunities, and ultimately less money, even though this overtime rule is billed as you workers are going to get more. That's never been the case. It wasn't going to work that way. And we're pleased that the election result gives us an opportunity to make a change there. So we do see that light at the end of the tunnel. There is a parting of the clouds over the Department of Labor now that we've got a Trump presidency.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing that knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. I do want to remind listeners to check out nationalclub.org. That is the association's website, and learn about all the issues that they're working on to help us in the private club industry. Brad, thanks so much for being on today, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Gabe.
Our webinar series resumes January the 4th with special guest Michael Crandall. Visit privateclubradio.com/education to register today.
So a few weeks ago, I had the honor of being a guest on the Club Sense podcast, a very excellent show produced by the folks over at VGM Club. Cam Schultz, the show's host, was a guest here on Private Club Radio back on episode 34, if you'll remember. So Cam invited me onto his show, and we had a lively discussion about membership marketing and my outlook on the golf industry. In this clip, we discussed the top 3 mistakes that clubs are making with their membership marketing. Have a listen.
Now, as you said, in your past, you worked in other industries in different marketing capacities for those industries. What do you see as a differentiation point between other business categories and the private club world?
Wow, I think there's so many things in the private club world when it comes to membership marketing that I would say we're really doing wrong, and I'd like to see changed. I know it's not nice to say that, but I think it's the truth. For me, there's really a few main points to consider here. How things are done in the private club in the private club world versus how they're done in the rest of the world or different industries out there. And of course, there's historical context to that. I mean, clubs didn't ever want to market themselves in the past, but
right.
After the economic changes that have happened, a lot of clubs have really their hands have been forced where they have to actually go out there and start to look for new members. So I think there's a lot of ways that this industry can improve, and that's really what I'm about, helping these clubs actually market their membership a little better. The first thing I would say is how we're going about our marketing messages. The standard club ads that I see out there, they're always really appealing to logic when they create their club communications, whether that's social media, whether it's a billboard you drive by or an ad you read in a magazine, for instance. Clubs really focus on these logical reasons to become a club member of their club. So it might be, we have a Fazio designed course. We have a 250-seat formal dining room. We've got Par-True tennis court. Those are all really great logical features. But why do people actually buy a private club membership? It's for a completely different reason. It's really for emotional reasons. So I always coach my clients and even folks that I come across in the private club world is to start to market your club and your membership to appeal to the emotional side of the brain, because that's where purchasing decisions really happen. If in the classic example I use when I'm speaking or going about, I tell people, think about the last car you purchased. Did you buy that car because it had more steel per square inch than its competitor, or because it had more stitching on the leather? I mean, that would be a really logical reason to buy a car, right? Like, this car for $35,000, I'll get more steel than its competitor.
Right.
That'd be a really logical reason. But that's not why we buy cars. We buy cars because we feel good behind the wheel, because we're going to impress our friends, because we like the way it handles, because it's friendly for the environment. These are all emotional reasons to purchase an automobile. And that's really all the purchasing decisions that folks make come from that emotional side of their brain. And so rather than trying to appeal to all these logical things like, how many tennis courts you have, who designed your golf course, what style of architecture the clubhouse is, we really want to appeal to those emotional benefits, the feeling of camaraderie, the feeling of safety and security that a private club can provide, the passion and the excellence and the history and tradition. Those are the emotional benefits. And I think that's one way that if we change that dialogue, we can be much more effective in bringing members into our clubs.
Dave, you hit on that point even more in depth on a really nice 3-part blog series that our listeners can read at aloeasy.com. And you're spot on there. It's really tough to say my 20,000 square foot clubhouse is nicer than your 20,000 square foot clubhouse.
Exactly.
What are two other common mistakes that, as you gain clients around the country, what are the other two common mistakes that you see in their current marketing efforts?
Well, there are two. You had mentioned it's a 3-part series, so I'll give you the other two, and I haven't written the third article, so you're going to get a sneak peek at what that third one is. But
spoiler alert.
The first one, I call it membership is not a sprint. And the reason I say it's not a sprint is because that's the classic line that you hear sales managers tell their folks, right?
Sure.
Whether it's in the club business coming from a board or a GM to the membership director, or whether it's out there in society, like, sales isn't a sprint. That's a great trite thing to say, right? And then usually they'll say, well, it's a marathon. But for me, it's not really either. It's really a series of short sprints, more like a relay race. So
okay.
I think, again, we're sort of fundamentally selling private club membership the wrong way. In the classic way that someone comes, to the membership office, they get what I call the 3-hour tour, even though sometimes it's like 1 hour, but I like that Gilligan's Island reference. So
Sure.
they'll shuffle a member from, the golf course to maybe the tennis facilities, to the pool, to the dining room, and they end up back in the membership director's office, and they're asked to make basically a purchasing decision, for lack of a better term, right? But what happens is that's not how we buy in modern times. That's not how we make our, financial decisions. And buying a private club membership is a financial decision. So, how do people buy nowadays? They do a lot of research online. They study companies. They follow them on their social media. It's really a 30-day process. And so what happens is, over the course of 30 days, I really feel that clubs need to start to develop a plan, a marketing attack that kind of makes your club a habit, because habit forming technology is really the holy grail. We all have cell phones in our pocket, for instance. And what happens? You get that little red notification icon, and you've got to check that email, or you've got to look at that Facebook photo, or whatever the case may be. And these technology companies have really found that, humans are wired for this, to create these habits in our minds. So how can you actually create a habit in the mind of someone who wants to, buy a private club membership? Rather than that 3-hour tour, why not bring them back to the club over the course of 30 days? Maybe it's the first time you invite them, for that tour, but maybe in week 2, you invite them to have a nice dinner at the club, or to enjoy a member event. So they can sort of experience the club in a different way. Maybe you bring them back the third time and you give them a free golf lesson, or, some time at the pool. Basically getting people back over the course of 30 days so that they associate the good times with your club. And so rather than, this is our shot to get them to sign on the dotted line in that 1 hour we have with them, let's really think about the membership process as a 30-day process where you're building a habit. And so I think that is one thing that's missing in a lot of clubs. And again, I totally get that method might not be right for every club. Like maybe it's a very exclusive club and they don't just want guests walking in all the time. I totally get that. But I think when used with some discretion, I think it could be a really powerful way to get people to become new members of your club. The third piece, again, which has not come out, but what I've noticed is that membership directors in private clubs always try to sell our top tier product. And what's that for every club? It's a full golf membership, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at any industry outside of the world of private clubs, this is almost never the case, right? You're not going to generally buy the top of the line S-Class Mercedes for the first Mercedes you ever buy, once you become successful, for instance.
Absolutely.
Or certainly not if it's your first car you buy coming out. So why are we always focusing on selling the top tier membership? If you look at any product, any service out there, there's generally an introductory offer, and we work people through our sales funnel until they become, more acquainted with our brand and really become brand champions. Then we sell them that top tier product. Again, you're probably not going to buy an Apple computer. You're probably not going to buy the top of the line Apple computer unless you just have money to blow. You're probably going to buy something that fits your needs at the time. So for me, I think this is a really important distinction that, we shouldn't be selling, always at least focusing on the full golf membership. What if we focused on selling an introductory membership, like a social membership, which historically the social members are sort of the bane of, they're the redheaded children
right.
of the private club industry, right? But if you actually can enact a plan, and I go to so many clubs and I say, what's your plan to move someone from a social member to a tennis member to a full golf member? And they're like, well, we don't have a plan. I said, well, the person who bought from you is the person who's most likely to buy from you again. And actually, there's actually been some research on this. Rick Coffey, a buddy of mine over at Club Essentials, said that it's 2.2 is the percent. So it costs a club 2.2 times more to find a new member than to actually retain an existing member. So it's more expensive to keep going after these new full golf members. Why not focus on people who have already bought from you, who have already purchased, who maybe are social members, and work them up your product chain and get them to that level? So focus on internal rather than external marketing. And so for me, that's the big third piece that's missing.
The breadth rather than the depth of what you're trying to get at there.
Yep, exactly. So what are your thoughts on that, Cam?
Well, I think you're spot on, Gabe. And I was going to ask, do you hear from your clientele, your clients, that this maturation process, this drip, quote unquote, drip campaign philosophy leads to longer, more enduring clients? I know with the economic downturn, it seemed like everybody did turn it into a sprint. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the problem with someone that buys right away is they're not your lifelong customer either.
That's exactly the problem. Is these membership directors and marketing folks are given these goals and almost unattainable metrics that they have to be held by the general manager, by their board of their membership committees or what have you. And so that what do? They just get whoever they can get in the door, and the relationship never matures. So just as many people as you get in, maybe you get in 30 members in a year, but you're losing 28, So, again, it's if that stat to me is very powerful. If it's 2.2 times more expensive for a club to go after a new member, and I really think that's the low end, honestly. I think it's probably, if we really dove deeper, it might even be more expensive to market.
Rick's sandbagger. He's sandbagging us a little bit there.
He might be. But even at 2.2 times of a rate, I think it's very telling that you should be focusing more on working those other members and keeping them happy.
So that was a little taste of the interview that I had with Cam Schultz. Hope you enjoyed that little piece. There's a lot more about that. We dove into millennials and some other topics. So if you want to check it out, I definitely recommend you subscribe to the Club Sense podcast. Sense spelled CENTS, like dollars and cents. And check out that wonderful show. Another guy who's doing something really exciting in the club industry. That's going to do it for today's show. I hope you will join me back here next week for another edition of Private Club Radio. And until next week, here's to your membership success.
Just because this round is over doesn't mean you can't enjoy the 19th hole. Check out privateclubradio.com for more. Private Club Radio is brought to you by the Private Club Agency, the premier marketing and consulting firm dedicated to helping clubs increase and retain their membership. Visit privateclubagency.com to learn more.